Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here.
Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Mikkipedia, and this week on the podcast I have returning guest Marty Kendall, creator of Nutrient Optimiser, back on to talk micronutrients and satiety. So I originally had Marty on for episode 120 to talk more broadly on his work in creating the Nutrient Optimiser and helping people understand the importance of micronutrients when it comes to their diet. And it was such a fabulous conversation that we met up at Low Carb Denver, and I got to know Marty a bit more, and he's such a wealth of information. And so this time around on the podcast, on the back of my conversation with Dr. Ted Naiman, which we spoke about satiety, Marty and I discussed the important role that micronutrients have on feeling satisfied and satiety in the diet. We discuss Marty's data. So if you remember, he's an engineer and just an absolute data nerd in a good way, which helped figure out factors that help people lose weight and keep it off, whether or not you're on a low carb diet or a low fat diet. The important role of fibre for keeping calories lower by a substantial amount, and Marty's got some great research and great data points on this and has analysed both data sets from broad sort of population-based studies, but also has several thousand sort of data points of his own from people who go through his course. We discuss the types of foods to focus on that provide nutrients and satiety, regardless of dietary leaning. And actually, we discuss so much more than this because Marty is such an enthusiast in this space, so easy to talk to, so smart about the topic that really we just went through a range of topics, and I think you're really going to love it. For those of you who missed the first episode where Marty came on, that's episode number 120, and I'll link to it in the show notes. Marty Kendall is an engineer who seeks to optimise nutrition using a data-driven approach. Marty's interest in nutrition began 18 years ago to help his wife Monica better control her type 1 diabetes, and we discussed that in that earlier interview. Since then, he has developed a systematised approach to nutrition tailored for a wide range of goals, contexts, and preferences. Over the past 5 years, Marty's shared his research over at optimisenutrition.com. Honestly, guys, if you have not been to that website, absolutely go there and just have a look at the amazing amount of free resources that Marty provides to help you better understand your diet and the approach that you can take. He has developed Nutrient Optimiser and data-driven fasting to guide thousands of people on their journey towards nutritional optimization. So Marty can be found over at optimisenutrition.com, which we've linked in the show notes. And as I said, I've also linked to that previous episode. I think you guys are really going to love it. So just a reminder though, the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of the podcast out there and amongst literally thousands of other podcasts. So more people get the opportunity to learn from guests that I have on the show, like the one we're just about to listen to today, Marty Kendall. Marty, how's things?
Yeah, good. So excited to chat again, Mikki.
Oh, I am stoked that you were happy to come on. First of all, so great because, of course, anyone who is a regular listener of the show will remember you were on in episode 120.
Yep.
And we talked about your work with nutrient-driven fasting, which is super fascinating, optimizing nutrition. And then, of course, we met in person, Low Carb Denver.
Like 4:00 in the gym. When
I was going to say.
Jet lagged.
I know. And actually, time-wise, for you, it was like, so for me, it was, I think, 1 a.m. New Zealand time or like 12 a.m. New Zealand time. And for you, it would have still been yesterday. Like,
that
was
my
crazy.
body was just confused, but I had so much energy from sitting on a plane for 24 hours that I needed to lift something heavy.
And actually that gym was remarkable.
Gym.
Yeah. Like often they oversell hotel gyms if you look at the pictures, because of course that's one of the first things I look at wherever I'm going to stay. Most places, I mean some places you just
stay wherever. But so it was just such a pleasant surprise that the picture they had actually was reality. It's not often the case.
Yep. Everything's bigger in America. It's crazy.
I know.
Big gym, big roads, big airports.
Yes, totally. So what's been happening since then, Marty?
Just plugging away, doing my life has become data-driven fasting and the macros masterclass and the micros masterclass, and using all that data and analysing it. I'm just completely fascinated by data-driven nutrition and taking an engineering approach to it. And just really thrilled. You talked to Ted about satiety. Just really thrilled that satiety as a concept is picking up in a data-driven approach that I think can help a lot of people. So that's inspired me a whole lot more to dive back into the data even more and try to answer all the questions. I chat to Andreas occasionally and see all the discussion on Twitter, and it's like, how can I answer those questions with the data? And that's been my quest for a while. Here's all this controversy and dogma. How can I use the data to cut through and answer things quantitatively and give another perspective?
I love that, because your talk at Low Carb Denver I found super fascinating, like focusing in on the micros, because of course we often think about macros for satiety, and we'll do a bit of a it's more nuanced, I think, than what even I was aware of, and you do such a great job to highlight where some of those where some of the sort of assumptions we make, where they might break. So I'd love to chat to you about that, but particularly the micronutrients, because it's almost like that complete diet picture, because we don't just eat macros, we eat food.
Yeah, I'm trying to start a rumor that nutrition is about nutrients, Mikki. So I don't know if you can get on board with that. It sounds bloody stupid to say maybe nutrition's primarily about nutrients, but it seems to be about everything else, like, avoiding bad things, saturated fat, cholesterol, meat, plants, animals, name it, saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. Everything's trying to kill you.
Oh, Marty, there'd be nothing left to eat if you just followed all of that. Everyone. If you just listened to everything you heard, you'd be. What are the? I was going to say fruitarian. That's not actually true. But the people who just sort of subsist on air. I don't know who those people are. Breatharian. But what about those toxins in the environment? I mean. It's all over. It's all over.
It's pollution in the air too. We're screwed, Mikki. Yeah, I don't know.
Marty, I don't know this about you, but did you sort of start with an evolutionary sort of lens to all of this nutrition
great
stuff?
Question. I remember Troy Stapleton saying, who's a radiologist, low carb type 1 guy who was a mentor in the early days, said to me, nothing makes sense outside the context of evolutionary biology. And I didn't quite understand that maybe 8 years ago when he said that to me, but that makes a hell of a lot of sense now. A bit like Ted Naiman, I actually started in a Seventh Adventist upbringing until I was 10. We got out of the family, left the church at 10. So I started in a very much a creationist, vegetarian approach, but I suppose that's given me a unique perspective on dogma and what it's like to live inside a fishbowl, and why we need to jump out and use data to understand and break through the dogma. So everybody sort of lives their own little fishbowl, and when you can stand back and look at the big picture data, you can sort of break out of the dogma and understand the fishbowl that you live in a little bit better.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess I remember, I think, knowing that about you because I've seen some stuff that you've written sort of in and around that, but I'd sort of forgotten that, because your work with nutrients and micronutrients is just so sort of aligned with
paleo in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because it's sort of what the body wants, and we don't really think about that, and a lot of them aren't in the sort of modern day food supply, but it doesn't mean that we can't have these other foods which we now have so accessible and so available, but it's just, at what cost, I guess.
Everything's on a spectrum of energy versus nutrients, and really in the past, energy was hard to come by from carbs and fat, so it's really prized. We get a massive dopamine hit from getting carbs or fat. And, if you get both together, scored, you're prepared for winter, you're building fat, win, 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 and you just get this addictive dopamine overdrive response, super physiological, according to Dana Small from a really cool 2018 study. But in the past, that's how we're wired. But today, we just live in this environment where we've solved the energy crisis. We've used subsidies and technologies and fertilizers and industrial ag and ultra processed food that just give us this bolus of instant refined energy from carbs and fat together. And we're lacking nutrients. In the past, nutrients were really easy to get. Everything we could catch or kill or pluck out of the ground was packed with nutrients and not much energy. But today it's the opposite. So we can just use modern technology and data to reverse that just a little bit to get the results we want.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really loved when I was just reading your stuff, Marty, is you're fairly agnostic when it comes to, and I know that we've talked about this before, when it comes to sort of diet tribes or, and of course you just mentioned dogma, there's, if I say there's no place for dogma, I mean there isn't, but of course dogma is everywhere.
Oh, yeah,
but,
yeah. We can't escape our own dogma. We've all got some
God,
bias.
No.
So,
no, God, no.
But we can use data to break free of it a little bit.
Yeah. And do you know, some would argue, and I hear this a lot from nutritionists actually and dietitians, that nutrients aren't a problem because of fortification. And if you look at a lot of breakfast cereals, milk replacements, substitutes, even orange juice. I mean, Milo. So, all of these foods, they're actually, and Marty, in New Zealand, we have this thing, we have a Life in New Zealand lab. I'm not sure if it's still running, but it's down at Otago Uni. And, they do a once a year, how much it costs to meet your nutrient requirements if you have a basic diet or if you have a diet where you are able to, you can afford a bit more indulgent type food. And if you look at it ticking the nutrient box, it ticks everything, including iron, which I find amazing because, 40% of women are sort of low in iron. Yep. But, it ticks all of these boxes. But if you go a little bit under the hood, you can see they include things like Milo in there because they don't have the quantity of animal protein sort of required, which is a bit of a tangent to my sort of, circling back to my sort of question is that, do we even know, and I don't even know if you will know this, do we know how available those nutrients are when we fortify? Like, have you ever looked at that?
I've got a question for you. Which food uses potassium fortification? Can you name anything?
I actually don't.
No.
Because it's not on the radar, actually. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and potassium keeps coming up as one of the things that is a dominant satiety factor in the statistical analysis. And it seems we crave foods that contain more potassium, calcium, iron, but not, those B vitamins that are easy to throw into Milo or your breakfast cereals don't tend to pop up. So we tend to find, you crave the nutrients that are harder to get, that aren't as fortified as much, like potassium and calcium, but also you can identify the signature of satiating foods, and they're not the fortified breakfast cereals that are chock full of B vitamins that are healthy for you because they've got, nutritious, because we threw a lot of cheap, teeny tiny B vitamins that we could advertise it on the label, and they may actually make you, satisfied with that breakfast cereal, so you're less likely to go get meat and seafood that contains those B vitamins naturally. So it may not just be good for the label, it may be, maybe it's good to get a bit more B vitamins if you've got a really crappy diet, but it might actually make you more satisfied to keep on chowing down the Cocoa Pops rather than the steak and seafood that you probably really need that actually contains those nutrients naturally. So it's interesting to look at the data and see that we crave potassium and calcium in a big way, and they're the ones that aren't fortified as much, and maybe iron on a very low protein diet.
Yeah, and I like the way that you put that, the sort of the signature of a particular food, because I think that if these are foods that we crave, and hey, you have the data on this, but foods that do contain potassium naturally will also contain a lot of other things that we will probably need, right? So it's almost like this so it's part of a complete sort of package that we would naturally sort of need, rather than that you're just going to find in a box of refined grains.
Yeah, if you look at protein leverage, we seem to crave enough protein. And there seems to maybe be a similar sort of nutrient leverage effect where we crave enough calcium and potassium and iron. But at the same time, it might just be, you know, how Facebook and Google and YouTube target, you look like someone who will buy this product, so we're going to advertise this product to you because you behave like somebody that will buy this product and give us money. This is a similar sort of approach to nutrition, that we say this is the signature of food that provides the nutrients that aligns with a lower energy intake. So we can reverse engineer nutrition to say this is a higher satiety diet approach for someone on a low carb diet or a low fat diet or even a low protein diet. They all sort of have different signatures.
Yeah, okay, and I have to say that the relative success of that Facebook ad campaign, campaigning for me to buy things, leaves me hopeful for your approach. Actually, if we can all like,
how much money is YouTube making out of targeted advertising?
Anyway, I know, right?
Facebook's a little bit more hindered lately. Now you can opt out of, every app tracks you, but it's the same sort of data-driven approach. And ChatGPT uses big data it's basically a big predictive text algorithm to understand what's the likely next word that will come after this word based on this question. It's, everybody who's winning the game these days is using big data, and nutrition research is still in the freaking dark ages comparatively. Well,
totally.
The data-driven companies are winning. Data is the big new oil, really. It's where the money is in finance, and I think it is with nutrition that we can say, let's cut through the dogma and what foods actually help us to win the game of not overeating, which is I think is a big deal for a lot of people, unfortunately, these days.
I completely agree. And if we think about, because one thing that people tend to agree on is that the calorie itself is probably the toxin in the diet, or the excess consumption of the calorie, right?
We've talked a lot about insulin toxicity and hyperinsulinemia and insulin bad, but what's the root cause of that? It's energy toxicity. Insulin is just a regulator hormone in your body. When you've got more energy stored, you need more insulin to hold that energy in storage, and the root cause is energy toxicity, and the root cause of energy toxicity is a nutrient poor, low satiety diet, and we can quantify that.
Yeah, for sure. And then for someone to adhere to a diet, they need, we need to satisfy that appetite, and that's one of the things that Ted and I obviously spoke about. Like, if you can have a diet that is satiating enough so you're not overeating calories, then you're much more likely to be successful in the long term.
Yeah, you can count calories and track calories and try to fight against your appetite. And I'm going to eat half a pizza rather than a whole pizza today, but 3 days later you're still going to be, wow, I'm so hungry, and I'm going to eat 2 pizzas now because I'm just so damn hungry. But if you can change what you eat, you can manage how much you eat. And we've got data to prove that protein is the dominant factor, but you've got other factors: energy density, calcium, potassium, iron, fibre, vitamin C, even folate on a low carb diet. There's sort of different nutrients that come together that A, satisfy our cravings, and B, come with other nutrients, and C, they're sort of the signature of foods and meals that are more satiating.
Okay,
for most people, most of the time.
Yeah. So on that then, Marty, I know that you've looked at both low carb and low fat and what these nutrients are that help people feel more satisfied, are more satiated, therefore more likely to sort of stick to them. Can we, first of all, I'm really interested to know, why did you explore both? Is it just because of your agnostic sort of approach to diet? You thought it would be more helpful for people, or was this just the patterns that you were seeing people sort of adopting from your data? Or,
I mean, the reality is that the majority of people follow a low-fat diet, and you want to tailor it to suit people who consume a low-fat diet, and not just use the factors that work for a low-carb diet, which was originally most of our data. And then we had 150,000 days of data from people using Nutrient Optimiser, logging and chronometer, and then I dragged in 150,000 days of data from the NHANES US Nutritional Survey, so doubled it. All of a sudden, I had all this data on people eating a low-carb or a low-fat diet, and really noticed that protein isn't as big a deal for people on a low-protein diet or even a low-fat diet, because they're just not getting as much protein. So protein leverage doesn't work as well if you're not eating as much protein. So if you're not actually using the lever, you can't get the lever. It's like you can't, if you're not even eating fibre, fibre's not going to be satiating because you're not eating any. And similar sort of approach, that if you're on a low-fat diet and not eating as much protein, then protein isn't going to help you as much because you're just not eating as much. So it's like, what are the factors on a low-fat diet that can help people optimize the satiety as well? And there seems to be a break point with, there's different factors. People who eat a lower carb diet eat 30% less, but people eat a lower fat diet also eat about 30% less than people eating a 12% protein with a perfect balance of fat and carb energy. So there's sort of a break point where jump either way and you have a different satiety factors for each diet.
Yeah. So Marty, how did you define low carb and low fat actually? Because of course there are lots of definitions out there in both the literature, and you listen to different people that they may tell you similar or different things. But given that we want to know success in these approaches, it would be good to sort of quantify that, I think.
Yeah. It's just, are you getting more of your energy, non-protein energy, from fat or carbs? So it's just a simple clean, and there seems to be a peak when people are getting a similar blend, 50-50 energy from fat and carbs together. We get a peak. So if you go to either side of that, if you're lower fat or lower carbs, you get greater satiety because you're just getting out of that fat carb dopamine overdrive. Perfect, evolutionary biology. We're preparing for winter and we're going to go hyperphagic and eat as much as we can for as long as we can, and all of a sudden I feel addicted to food, is what a lot of people say these days. A lot of people say, oh, this satiety approach doesn't work for me because I feel addicted to food. And you look at the low satiety foods, they're the M&Ms and Doritos and Ritz crackers and things that people feel addicted to. So no one's addicted to spinach and chicken breast and steak.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so if you were able to then go, right, so the lower carb, so it's not necessarily, you're not talking about like a ketogenic approach or a super low carb diet. It's actually just, if you're getting more of your energy from fat and protein, then that's a lower carb approach, and lower than what, the guidelines would probably sort of have you at.
Yeah. I mean, but you can bicker over what's low carb, but it's just, are you getting more of your energy from fat or carbs? There's sort of different approaches that tend to work, and different nutrients that tend to be more satiating.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested, like with that NHANES data, did you have a look at how many people would actually sort of, what percentage of that population fell into low carb versus the low fat? Is there a shift or?
Definitely the people they interviewed were more high carb, lower fat, and scarily low protein. A lot of them are well under the 10% minimum AMDR, acceptable macronutrient distribution range. That gave me a whole lot more data to understand what happens on a lower fat diet, because a lot of my data from the optimizers who are prioritizing protein and tend to be lower carb, really nice chunk of data from them too.
Yeah. And Marty, because you've written a couple of a lot of great blog posts, obviously, but one I'm thinking of in particular, when and we'll link it in the show notes as well, that basically if you, regardless of whether you're reducing fat or carbohydrate, generally speaking, if you hit that sort of satiety factor right, then they're going to be eating 30% less calories. Did I read that right?
Yeah. If you swing from 40% non-fiber carbs to 10 to 20% non-fiber carbs, you get about a 30% reduction in intake just because you're jumping out of that fat carb dopamine overdrive zone. And similarly, if you're on a very high carb, low fat diet, think of just eating rice or spinach or sweet potato without any butter or oil. Those foods are going to be hard to overeat. But if you take your potato and add a whole bunch of industrial seed oils, they become a potato chip, and they're really easy to overeat.
Oh, yeah, totally. What about like salt? Like if I just put salt on my baked potato, am I going to, because I feel like that's going to drive a bit of my desire to eat the food. Like, is that what you sort of see in your...
Sorta. Like we definitely need sodium. Sodium's critical and it tastes better. Like sometimes sodium can nearly taste like sugar to me because, it tastes good and you want to eat more of it. But if you eat too much of it, you get to a point where the food tastes too salty because you've, it's basically a osmotic transfer. When you don't have enough salt in your body sucks in the salt really quickly. But when you get too much, you've got a higher sodium concentration. Your body doesn't want more salt. You don't absorb more salt, and your taste buds say, no, thank you. I've had enough salt and that tastes too salty, thank you, and can we eat something else? So if you're getting not enough, things that are salty taste really attractive. So up to about 4, we set our optimal nutrient intake for sodium at 4 grams per 2,000 calories, which is a lot less than the 1.5 that's in the USDA guidelines, which is based on hypertension guidelines. Everything else is based on the World Health Organization guidelines, but then they've picked the hypertension guidelines for sodium, which is crazy. So the sodium guidelines seem to be a bit low in the USDA food guidelines and everybody else that follows them. But you definitely crave some salt, but you get to a point where too much salt is not going to help you anymore.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, when you just talked, then you said that your 4 grams was lower than the USDA, but what you meant to say was higher. Yeah. No,
two and a bit times what.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for athletes, they're going to be sweating a lot and need even more and crave even more. But
totally
similar sort of way, you see a similar satiety response in the data for other nutrients as well. But sodium is the one we think of and we can taste, but there seem to be the same effect to some degree in the other nutrients.
Yeah. Now, Marty, this is a bit of a tangent actually, but I'm thinking about when I think about salt. So there are these like competitions, like eating competitions, and I think I was looking at, no, I wasn't looking at, I'm sorry, it's a lie. I was reading Rob Wolf's Wired to Eat.
Yep.
And he talks about this ice cream eating competition where the person who was, they were, how much ice cream can you eat in a certain amount of time or whatever. And then this person reached almost what you would think would be like complete like fullness. And then they ordered chips and they ordered like hot potato fries. And even though they were really full, they started eating them, and then that almost like flicked a switch for them to be able to eat more ice cream.
Yeah, and that's where we, like on a normal, not everybody's doing an eating competition, but at the same time we're eating, fish and chips. We're eating steak and eggs or steak and potato. We always balance our protein and energy again and again and again. We're always sort of seem to be balancing our energy versus nutrients. So that's an extreme example. If you got eaten too many hot dogs, then you need the ice cream to clean your palate. And then there's something that resets that you can keep on eating the other foods. So yeah.
There's that, or we just have a dessert stomach, don't we?
Well, yeah, that's a different way of looking at it. If you love chicken breast and you can keep eating the chicken breast, but if somebody puts the ice cream in front of you, you're still going to be craving that ice cream and have room for it. So the key is not to jump to really high satiety only foods all the time, but just nudge up the satiety score just a little bit.
And I think that's what I really love about what you were writing. You were sort of setting out, and we'll talk, obviously we haven't really sort of dived into the details, and I've almost like gone to the punchline, but
follow the script, Mikki, you wrote the questions.
No, I told you this wasn't a script. I said these are bullet points, which I sort of like, which help me think about these things. But you know, Marty, I'm organic in nature. I just talk the things that come out of my mouth.
That's okay. We're having fun.
Yeah, exactly. So, but essentially, like the goal isn't to have the most, to have the nutrients that are going to give you the most satiety all of the time, because that's not necessary. It might not even be feasible, but it's to shift that satiety curve a little bit to the right. So you're able to then adhere to your diet of choice, be it low carb or low fat, because let's face it, adherence is the most important sort of thing.
Totally. And jumping from a satiety score of 0 to 100 aligns with like a 70% drop of calories. So
yes.
Who wants to live on a 70% cut for very long? That's brutal. So let's go from maybe the average American sitting at 30%, they can nudge it up to 50% and get a 20% reduction in calories, or if that's working for you, you can go from 50 to 55 next week and just nudge it up. And that's where I think a lot of these indexes fail. And when people talk about low carb or carnivore or low fat or higher satiety, I mean, Ted and Andreas have been talking about higher satiety, not high satiety, to try and get people away from that extremist edge. But everybody wants to go to the extreme. They say, I ate chicken breast and spinach only, and I was hungry. I was like, yeah, because you just need a bit more energy. But if you just nudged it up incrementally at a sustainable rate, that you're achieving 0.5 to 1% weight loss per week, you'd find that sustainable, and you wouldn't break, you wouldn't fall off, you wouldn't be craving the ice cream and the chips and the pizza to the same degree, and you could sustain it for the long term.
Yeah, but 0.5%, that's a bit slow, really, isn't it? Is what people are thinking, not what I'm thinking, because I totally agree with you. But people are always in a rush.
People want the 3% weight loss, and that's
totally
like the hardcore protein spring modified fast, which you're all about. But if you live on a protein spring modified fast, yes, it's the most aggressive, most effective way to lose weight. But most people regain that because they didn't learn to eat normally. They didn't relearn. They didn't form new habits on the way down. They just jumped off the mountain, hit the bottom, and then went, I'm so hungry. I've been living on shakes and protein powder and only, and wow, I can eat chips and pizza now. All bets are off. It's like you just took Wegovy for a year and ate donuts, and then you've got this massive nutrient deficiency that your body's trying to compensate for when the insurance money runs out.
Yeah, 100%. And, I like that. So if we get back to the nutrients on the low carb diet that people are that you recognise as important to try and include, and of course we'll talk about what food choices. There's potassium as one.
Yeah. Protein's the dominant one for a low carb diet. So if you're getting plenty of protein, that's more than half the satiety factors. But then you've got calcium, potassium, folate, and sodium is also a positive factor, because a lot of people struggle to get enough sodium when they cut out processed foods. So you're going to be a little bit more satiated with enough sodium, but potassium and folate, the sort of the non-starchy green veggies that complement the meat and seafood. So you get a more complementary, balanced micronutrient profile that aligns with eating less.
Yeah. So what are those foods then? You said dark leafy greens.
Yeah, dark leafy greens, and then the meat and seafood will be, meat and seafood. So with a lower fat, which drives a higher protein percentage.
Okay, cool. But I'm talking about a low carb approach here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you're getting you're getting 70% fat, let's prioritize protein and dial back the energy from 70 to 60% fat, while your carbs might be 10 to 20%. So it's not a low fat diet, it's just a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Because you're already lower in energy from carbs.
Yeah. And that just gives people a little bit more, feels wiggle room actually, when you sort of do it like that.
Yeah. And it's just dialing back. You can dial back carbs or fat, or carbs and fat, and you get the same response.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned industrial seed oils.
Yep.
Are they going to drive our hunger more, do you think, than just sort of natural sources of fat? What do you know about that, actually? Do we know?
The fat in our diet over the last 100 years has gone up by 800 calories per person, or the availability of fat in the American food system has gone up massively since we learnt to use synthetic fertilizers to grow seed crops that we could hydrogenate and process and make really cheap oils. They were a lubricant and useless until they realized we could use them in food and color and flavor them so they look like butter, and call it margarine or Crisco or whatever. I'm sort of with Ted Naiman on the idea that I don't think there's any magical thing about them that makes them inherently evil, particularly PUFAs. They're just a very small proportion of our diet, and to get down to 2% that some people advocate by eliminating all nuts and pork and, non-grass-fed beef, and it's really hard to get to that really, really low level. But I think where you get into trouble definitely is where you're combining industrial seed oils with refined starch and sugar all together. Particularly it's the refined starch and the seed oils, monounsaturated fat, particularly together, that's the signature of ultra-processed foods that we can't stop eating. So if you're managing your overall fat intake and not eating industrial seed oils, particularly combined with refined flour, you're going to be in a pretty good place, and it's going to be hard to overeat those things, and you'll have your omega-6 and and monounsaturated fat in check.
Yeah, and that's what I think as well, is that we talked earlier about sort of a signature, signature of what sort of in food, and that's what I see industrial seed oils sort of being, or that really high omega-6 intake. Like if you're getting those industrial seed oils, then you're getting them from the processed food. Yep. And it's it's so reductionist, even though we are actually talking quite reductionist about nutrients which are which impact satiety, but to look at sort of zone in on just one thing when you sort of ignore these other features which we know drives overeating, it does seem a little bit short. So I don't know. I'm not sure why that's not part of the conversation, I guess, when it comes to those things. Yeah, I fully
agree. If you decide you're allergic to omega-6 fats, you'll be avoiding every bit of processed food. So it'll work like magic, because you'll never touch anything packaged or processed, because they've all got added canola or rapeseed oil or whatever oils that are added to starch and sugar. And even sugar, a lot of people are afraid of sugar and they're addicted to sugar and whatever. But, similar to that peak in carbs that's at 40%, we get a peak in intake at 20% sugar. But if you're eating a diet that's 40% sugar without any fat, it's probably going to be, mainly fruit. Those things are hard to overeat. So if you're living on a diet that's a large, 40% sugar, you're going to be eating veggies and fruit that are hard to overeat. So it's not necessarily the individual nutrient that's evil. It's when you combine sugar, starch, saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, omega-6 all together in a form that's never ever occurs in nature. It only occurs in ultra-processed foods. So once you identify that combination signature, you can then avoid those.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And what about for a low-fat diet then? And I have to say, when it comes, I was very much in the low-carb, healthy fat, high-fat camp probably 7 years ago. And I have changed that actually, Marty, over time, just working with people, just in that I'm certainly lower carb. That hasn't really changed, and appropriate carbohydrate for activity, but I'm not as much of a fan of the higher fat approach for most people in real life, because most people they've got excess body fat that they need to lose themselves. And I remember reading in Volek and Finney's Bible, The Art and Science of Low Carb Living, how they actually say, it's right at the back, if you're struggling to lose weight on a ketogenic diet, you could actually just be overeating that fat. So the idea isn't to layer on all these, the cream and the cheese and the oils. It's actually to encourage your body to utilize that as an energy source. So naturally, and maybe this is my 80s diet background as well, so maybe it sort of precedes this, but I'm probably more in that low carb, low fat
camp, but without the, and high protein, obviously.
Yeah, totally. And same here, as much as I've written a book called Big Fat Keto Lies, I live with two type 1 diabetics, and we tend to eat a lower carb, higher protein, with as many veggies as we can throw in sort of diet. But yeah, on a low fat approach, protein has a smaller impact, energy density has a bigger impact. And then you've got calcium, potassium, iron, vitamin C, sodium as well, tend to have sort of nutrient cravings. And
so that vitamin C, that's different, isn't it? Because that didn't really feature as much in the low carb diet.
Yeah, calcium and potassium and iron are all identified in the USDA food guidelines as nutrients of concern that the average American's not getting enough. And then when vitamin C was the first micronutrient that was discovered when all the sailors got scurvy, and you read the chaplain at the time recounted the stories of the sailors jumping off the ship and indulging with luxurious indulgence in these moss and fruits and anything they could find that was contained the vitamin C. So obviously when you get deficient enough, you potentially crave maybe any nutrient. And it seems that vitamin C on a diet that is, who's eating fruit and veggies these days? It doesn't seem many people are. And it seems the average American who shows up in the NHANES data is potentially craving vitamin C to some degree, in addition to calcium and potassium.
I actually think I saw something a year or so ago, maybe longer, because time seems to fly, that actually said that there were, in real life, there are cases of scurvy, actually, which is like, I'm a massive vegetable fan, so, and fruit, and I enjoy fruit as well, but I tend to eat more veggies than anything else. And so vitamin C was never sort of an issue for me. But yeah, actually, when I talk to a lot of clients, a lot of, some of them really struggle to get in, or they just don't prioritize the vegetables in their low carb diet or their low fat diet, actually, which I find super interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Marty, what types of food are the food choices then going to be that different if we're thinking about, optimizing satiety on a low carb approach versus a low fat approach? Because a lot of those nutrients were the same.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely some overlap with protein, calcium, potassium, and then, but lower carb foods are the non-starchy veggies and lower fat foods are the non-starchy green leafy veggies, onions, potato, peppers, those sorts of things on a lower fat diet, along with maybe fruit. And then on a lower carb diet, you've got the meat, seafood, and lower fat dairy if you're trying to lose body fat.
Yeah. I'm a fan of low-fat dairy. It's like one of my favourite foods.
Yeah.
Are you a fan?
Yeah, I'm all over the higher protein yogurt with some tasty protein powder mixed in for a quick breakfast snack, and that's pretty much my go-to. So that's how I start the day. Just smashes hunger for a lot of the day.
Well, and in Australia, you guys have some great yogurts. Actually, you guys have a much better range than what we do here in New Zealand.
I love New Zealand food. I thought it would just taste it all. You could drive around the South Island and see these happy sheep and cows on green pastures. And the food was just off the chart because it's also natural and minimally processed, at least on South Island.
Oh, well, amazing. I'm glad you have that perception, and I'm not going to disabuse you of that. So you keep that in the in your sort of thought.
It's crazy. We went to Vanuatu, and they've got the best tasting food in the world, but it gets shipped to China, and then they get all the local Vanuatans go, we're going to eat this white man food that's the processed junk, and you go into their stores and they're lined with Oreo cookies and seed oils, and they are literally addicted to those Oreos. They just, they're lining every road, the empty packets. They take their food that they grow and then make a bit of money at the market and buy vegetable oil and Oreo cookies, and it's just diabolical. They just blow up.
Oh, and you all know Professor Grant Schofield. He talked about his experience in Kiribati, which was very similar, actually, to that. It's just a sort of the result of an industrial sort of world, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's criminal.
Yeah, totally. So, Marty, can you talk to me about the protein leverage theory
And when that breaks, because you did already mention that, but I did come across something that you wrote that talked about a low, well, maybe yes, when it breaks, can you just remind me of sort of what's going on there? But also, like you mentioned low protein diets. Is there ever a reason to have a low protein diet? Like, I'm really interested to sort of understand more your thoughts around that.
Short answer is no, but there's definitely an observation that when people eat a very, very low protein diet, they eat less than the 12% protein, which seems to be optimal to eat more and store more on your body. It seems to be optimally efficient to build fat and store energy on about 12%. So if you get down to 7%, which is extreme therapeutic keto or fruitarian or whole food plant-based diet, those people tend to eat less. A lot of people talk about the longevity benefits of a diet that avoids protein. I'm pretty skeptical there, because what do we die of? We're not laboratory mice in cages with no infections, or cold, miserable, depressed C. elegans worms in a petri dish in a lab.
Yes.
We're robust outdoors humans who get infections and die of broken hips that put us in hospital, and we get an infection in hospital, and then we get on 18 medications that we get suddenly prescribed and die of the complications. 30% chance of death within a year if you break your hip. So being robust seems to be really important when we're older. I don't think there's anything wrong with eating lower protein, low energy density foods if you've already got your protein in for the day and your nutrients in for the day, but those lower protein, lower energy density foods aren't as nutritious as the lower carb, protein focused meat, seafood and veggies.
Yeah, and I guess the people that might have a lower percentage of protein in their diet yet still meet protein requirements would be those with very high calorie requirements, right? The super active people where actually they don't need to do a lot to get in those nutrients they need because they're eating such a volume of food, which sort of describes elite athletes, really, like the swimmers, the NFL players, rugby players who don't sort of think about body composition and things like that. I'm not suggesting they all have rubbish diets, but you certainly hear of these athletes.
Michael Phelps pounding 8,000 calories a day to survive the thermal and activity that he needs to put out.
You just can't do that on a whole food diet. Like it's nigh on impossible. The digestive district, like it would be physically impossible to do that, right?
And if you're an Ironman triathlete, the average couch potato who's not active needs a higher satiety diet and more nutrients per calorie. But the average Ironman triathlete who's working out for 50 hours a week training is going to need a lower satiety diet and with a lower nutrient density, because they're getting a lot more energy in, so they can get the nutrients they need because they're consuming a lot more calories. But people who are less active need less energy and therefore need to work out a way to pack in all the nutrients they need with less energy.
Yeah, for sure. And that I find that 12% number super interesting, and because that's essentially, it sounds like a protein dilute diet, right? Like this is what we're talking about. This is the modern diet. Like if you were just to eat if you didn't really think about nutrition, you just sort of ate foods, Weet Bix and toast, sandwiches, maybe pasta, maybe some peas and carrots or whatever, probably coming in at about that 12%.
Yeah, the average American is 15.4 based on the NHANES data analysis. So 12% is pretty close. Yeah,
and actually, I remember looking at the data for New Zealand, and a colleague, Jamie Scott, pointed this out, that in New Zealand, so we have the last time we did a national survey was 2008, 2009. So I suspect, if anything, it's going to be a bit lower, but the average protein intake was about that 16%, but when you took out bread-based dishes from the analysis, the actual protein was about 10%. So of quality protein, we'll be getting 10% of our calories from protein. And I imagine Australia isn't that different, actually.
Yeah, Australia's about 16% as well.
Yeah.
But like you said, the protein that comes with grains is bound with fibre and harder to access. So if you're on a getting most of your protein from plant-based sources, you need more protein.
Yeah, for sure. And then, Marty, what is when you were looking at your data, what was so generally speaking, people who followed either a low carb or a low fat that had these higher satiety foods ate sort of 30% less calories than those people who didn't really focus on on the protein, on the calcium, iron, potassium, things like that.
Yeah, that's when you just look at carbohydrate.
Yeah.
But when you look at, if you move from 0 satiety index score to a satiety index score of 100, it's a 70% drop in calories. So it's very extreme if you move from one extreme to another. But let's say most people are at 30%, just nudging up a little bit will help you.
Yeah, okay. How does your satiety index differ from satiety per calorie?
It's still a focus on satiety per calorie, but Ted and Andreas, Dr. Hava, Ted and I have been on a very similar journey for quite a while, from SDA upbringings, not that we knew each other back then, both engineers, and both gone through a lot of the same mistakes and diet fads of paleo, low carb, keto, and...
Did you do carnivore? Were you carnivore?
Tic-tacking for a while. I've never been I eat plenty of... I'm not anti-meat at all.
No.
I enjoy my steak and protein, but I'd never gone exclusively carnivore. But, Ted and Andreas are big on the RCT trials, and they want a robust study to validate everything that goes into the satiety index. And me, I'm just like, give me all the data and I'll analyze that to find out what's most effective. And the good thing is both approaches come out at a similar sort of outcome that aligns and confirms the approaches. So yeah, I've brought in all diet doctors' satiety scores, and they align fairly closely with mine. So it's good for both of us to, cross-validate with different approaches.
I agree, because a randomized controlled trial the very term obviously indicates that everything is sort of clinical and controlled, which isn't real life, right? And I guess it's, you're studying mechanisms in an RCT, what happens when you change this one thing, if that's sort of the thing that you're thinking of. But then in real life, there are just so many factors which influence what we do that they're good to sort of inform. They're good to sort of make a statement about something, but it's that real life data, which is what you've got access to and what you work with, that then can sort of, I don't know, I feel like that's just as valid as an RCT.
Yeah. I was referring to Silicon Valley, whose philosophy is move fast and break things, and that's sort of my approach, is give me all the data and I'll make up something that generates a hypothesis. And if you can't wait for Kevin Hall to run the randomized controlled trial with a high satiety index, nutrient dense diet to have that RCT, if you can't wait for that, we've got the data and analysis now to tell you what foods and meals will help you do that. And we've got 832 person years of data. Can you imagine what that would cost for Kevin Hall to do in his little laboratory hospital? It'd be exorbitantly expensive to collect that much data to get the level of statistical significance that we can get from 300,000 days of data from thousands and thousands of people living at a wide range of protein and carb and fat intakes. So Kevin seems to end up, going, we're going to feed everybody 15% protein. It's like, well, that's not enough protein to actually see the protein leverage effect. And, yeah. And I like this data because it automatically eliminates ultra-processed food, which is, ultra-processed food has got that signature of low nutrient density and a combination of energy from starch and monounsaturated fat together. So you're automatically avoiding ultra-processed food, and you don't have to do the ANOVA calculations and say, how many ingredients has this got and was it designed for profit? It's just like, yeah, here's the data, here's the nutrient information. It does the calculations for you.
Is it mono, Marty, isn't it poly?
No, mono is just the biggest contributor to our energy.
Is it?
Poly is just a small 5% of energy.
So, what is the mono that's used in processed food?
Most industrial seed oil has a dominant energy from mono.
Yeah, because I thought soybean and canola were largely it's soybean and vegetable oil. I mean, what the heck is that anyway? But it's just But is it?
But mono is the one that pops up as statistically significantly
Yes.
correlated with eating more, and
Yeah.
saturated definitely contributes to eating more. But if you're getting protein, then that's going to come with some saturated
for
fats.
sure.
That drops off, and it's mono that's the thing that, as much as everybody says it's the magic heart healthy seed oil that you can eat in infinite quantities, if it's combined with starch and sugar with flavorings and colorings, it's also called ultra processed food.
Yeah, for sure.
Not so good for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because of course, it's it's more than just the oleic acid in olive oil that's sort of related to heart health and stuff, isn't it? But but I don't think that we're talking about extra virgin olive oil here, because that's certainly not what's put in ultra processed food.
No. It's just crazy. Like the plant-based vegans will tell you that monounsaturated fat is magic, and and poly's great too, and saturated's evil. And then at the other extreme, you've got the carnivore community telling you that poly is evil, which is contained in industrial seed oils. So they're just sort of shooting across the chasm, having this war about the oils that come with the opposition's favorite foods. And it just seems crazy. It seems like a crazy argument to me, when if you're managing the balance of nutrients and energy and not overdoing the fat, they all become irrelevant.
Yeah. And this is the thing, like you've highlighted which nutrients are going to be most beneficial from a satiety perspective, regardless of those two dietary approaches. It doesn't seem overly complicated. You're not like telling us to go out and seek out these sort of unicorn type foods, right? So how many people are actually doing this? Like when you look at the data.
I was going to say, I'm not telling you to go out and sun your privates, but that was a bit of a distraction.
Yeah. Oh, no, I've seen people talk about things like that.
Isn't that the new thing?
Oh, I'm not sure, because I haven't engaged. I've sort of just averted my eyes and just moved on to the next Twitter argument.
I'm not optimally healthy. Sorry, what was the question? I lost my train of thought.
So when you were analysing your data then, and you know that these nutrients are important for satiety, like it doesn't feel like it should be that hard to get. Is that what your sort of data showed you, that actually the majority of people who you would categorise as low carb or low fat, like they were pretty much meeting what you would suggest?
It's not magical. B, I don't know, you talked in your excellent 20-minute rant on protein that we're all sort of aiming for lower end protein. And I think, everybody wants to tell you that you don't need that much protein because these foods are really profitable. A lower protein diet is really, hyper profitable, hyper palatable. And in a similar way, we're recommending, we're trying to reduce the targets for how much vitamins and minerals we need. So it's easy to sell these ultra processed foods that are apparently good for the environment in some magical way. But really, when you get more nutrients per calorie, more is often better. And if you've got a balance of all of them, that are, our optimal nutrient intake targets are 2 or 3 or 4 times the minimum to prevent disease of deficiency. So if you're, and definitely if you're staying out of that carb plus fat hyperpalatable zone, you're doing a lot better. But once you get out of that, once you're not eating ultra processed food, you can improve by then dialing in your micronutrients even more. And when people chase their priority nutrients that you can quantify for yourself, if you track your food, you get even better results.
Yeah, awesome. And what do you think, though, Marty? And you've got an index yourself, the satiety index sort of score. Then there's the satiety per calorie. And in fact, on Twitter last night, I saw Kevin Hall put up something that suggested that there was a paper just released that showed that you could consume a diet that was maybe 60% ultra processed food and yet still meet the healthy eating index, which is another.
Yeah. I think it was 80%. You can create a diet that's 80%
Yes.
ultra-processed food.
And and look, there are ultra-processed foods which are not, they're not terrible for you. You know, there are different categories of ultra-processed food, but it's just most people are eating the types of ultra-processed food which do a disservice rather than that would actually, help with sort of nutrition.
The healthy eating index is crap.
Terrible, isn't it? Yeah.
Like it says let's prioritize monounsaturated fat and avoid saturated fat. So it's really skewed to that. The protein targets are incredibly low, and then you've got to get a whole lot of whole grains. And by the time you've filled your plate with a loaf of bread each day, you don't have much room for the meat and seafood and non-starchy veggies that actually give you the nutrients you need. So yeah, I think it's no surprise that the healthy eating index, you can create a good
score.
Get a good score with ultra processed foods, because I think it's actually nearly designed by Adventists and the ultra processed food industry.
You mean Kellogg's?
And
Sanitarium?
Sanitarium, Seventh Adventist have a large part in a belief-based dietary approach that avoids animal-based foods and prioritizes plant-based foods. So you're automatic, like if you're avoiding saturated fat and cholesterol and prioritizing unsaturated fat and trying to get your healthy whole grains, you've automatically avoided most animal-based foods and minimizing animal-based foods, which are quite nutritious.
Yeah, it so surprises me, Marty, that there are legitimate experts out there that do believe that that something like the healthy eating index or the compass, the food compass score or whatever, are legitimate ways, markers, or if you optimize these, then it's a good marker for a good diet. Like, I don't know, like is it just agenda and money and or do you know what? I sort of liken it a little bit to multi-level marketing. So the people that are out there selling Airborne and isogenics and stuff, like they've bought into this belief system basically. So it's not the individual's fault because they truly believe they're doing you a service when they're trying to sell you their shakes. I sort of feel that way about these indexes here. Like it's somewhere along the way they've just completely bought into it. It's not that they're not intentionally trying to overfeed us and create issues, but
yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts anyway? That's
wow, that's a whole new rabbit hole.
Sorry, and totally off script as well.
Yeah, I didn't prepare. But no, to be honest, I think where did nutrition science come from? It was Kellogg's and the SDAs and Lena Francis Cooper, who started the American Dietitians Association, who were trying to research to prove the beliefs and visions of Ellen G. White, and that's where nutrition started. So that's the bubble, the fish bowl that nutrition science started, and it's hard to escape that belief system that emphasizes minimizing animal flesh because it leads to, insert. If you listen to Belinda Fettke rant and rave,
yes,
everything she says is fantastic and spot on and agrees with my experience and upbringing. So yeah, nutrition science is rooted in belief and profiteering come together. So I think there's, maybe some differential benefits of unsaturated fat versus saturated fat. But if you prioritize getting the nutrients you need from food, you're not going to be obese and have metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and all those disappear. So it gets really murky when you focus on your balance of saturated versus unsaturated fat, and you just go down a massive rabbit hole that is largely irrelevant in my book if you're prioritizing getting the nutrients you need from food that provide greater satiety.
Yeah, because essentially if you do that, then it's a wash. Well, not a wash, but it's irrelevant because naturally you're not going to be over consuming these other things. Yeah. Totally. Hey, this is completely off script as well, but I'm so keen to know, have you looked at Mediterranean diet, Marty, in all of your, everyone talks about Mediterranean as the diet, and I think there are some healthful, of course there are healthful properties of the diet, vegetables, olive oil. I am a fan of olive oil and oleic acid, actually.
Cool.
And in small amounts of, well, I'm not a fan of small amounts of meat, but whatever. Have you looked into it at all, or is that a project for the future?
I don't know. I heard Stephen Guyenet say that a Mediterranean diet is sort of optimized for heart health based on the mono versus and omega-6 versus saturated fat, not necessarily for weight loss and satiety. I think if you're eating whole food fish and veggies and with a bit of olive oil, you're going to be perfectly fine and probably thriving. And they all avoid the ultra-processed fat and carb combo.
Yes.
They're whole food, and these people have great community and walk in the sun and live a long, happy life that's low stress. So I don't think there's anything magical about the Mediterranean diet, or that you can't differentiate from getting the nutrients you need without excess energy. Olive oil is great if you need the energy and you're active, but if you got a whole lot of stored body fat that you want to get rid of,
Probably
adding
don't
more
need
olive oil or any fat or even any carbs is not going to help you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Lastly, Marty, your data-driven fasting. So I know we touched on this last time, and this isn't in my script either, but I'm just keen. Any further insights into that you can sort of update us on, or?
It's great. I'm just fascinated that we end up sort of designed it to help people with type 2 diabetes and weight loss, but it seems to have attracted all these menopausal women that have tried fasting and keto and everything, and seem to be growing this massive community of middle-aged women that say this is the only thing that works for me, and it's magical.
Amazing!
So that's really encouraging. So it continues to grow and get great results every round, and about to start round 24, and it just really helps people using glucose as a fuel gauge. And I think the future, we can combine AI with your CGM data and your satiety and what you've eaten to design a diet that sort of is optimized based on your current blood sugars and how you slept and all those sorts of things. But I think quantifying nutrition and tailoring what you eat based on your blood sugars is really powerful, and that you can make better choices based on your blood sugars at the time that align with your hunger, and just getting in touch with your true hunger signals is really powerful.
I think I'm probably going to have to ask to speak to you at another point, Marty. We actually do a really deep dive into that, because I just find that so fascinating. Cool. If that's cool, because so many people say that fasting is not good for women, and yet your experience and your thousands of data points would suggest that that's not the case. But maybe it's the way that the way they're doing it is misguided.
Yeah. I mean, it's the more is better approach of, fast for 2 weeks or one meal a day, or some extreme approach using a glucose as a fuel gauge just says it validates your hunger. It's, yes, I need to eat now. So it's a sort of a confirmation that, yes, I need to eat 2 or 3 meals a day when my body needs the fuel, and this is the fuel it needs. If your blood sugar's higher, you don't need as much energy from carbs, particularly if your blood sugar's really low, then time to eat some carbs to boost it up quickly because your blood sugar's low. So it just times what you eat to exactly when you need it. And if you're chasing a lower blood sugar before you eat, you're draining your stored body fat and stored glucose.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's book that in at
do it
some
again.
point.
This is fun.
Yes. So, Marty, I always love chatting to you. I really enjoyed your company at Low Carb Denver, because it's so easy just to nerd out on all of these things. But, I'm hoping that what people sort of take away from this is that it doesn't matter whether it's low carb or low fat. It's actually chasing a nutrient-dense diet is going to overall support better body composition, better adherence to whatever plan you sort of use. And a large part of that is, of course, making sure you're not diluting the protein as well.
Definitely spread the rumor that nutrition is about nutrients.
Yes, nutrition is about nutrients. I love it.
Crazy engineers.
No, I love it. And of course, we talked all about your background in the first episode that I did with you, which was number 120. Where can people find out more, Marty?
Yeah, Google Optimizing Nutrition on Marty Kendall. We've got a blog. I've been spending way too much time on Twitter, which has been a bit too much fun lately. And we've got a community of about 8,000 people in our Optimizing Nutrition Mighty Networks community, where
Amazing.
I've been loading up all these simple 3x4 slides of pretty pictures to show this is high satiety foods, these are low satiety foods, and here's a list if you want to download it. So if you jump into that and get a whole ton of free stuff, I just want to see people get the ball rolling with this approach, because it really works. We've been doing it for 5 years with a macros and micros masterclass, and it definitely works. It's not a fad, and just hope it can help more people.
Amazing. Marty, thanks so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mikki. So much fun.
All right, team, hopefully you enjoyed that conversation. Look, we're both nerds and love it. And I just think you must be a nerd too if you engaged in this podcast. So I reckon that was just a real treat. So I'm so stoked that Marty was happy enough to come on again and chat to me. Next week on the podcast, I have a chat with plant-based physiotherapist and holistic expert and coach, Brad Dixon. Such a great conversation. That is next week on the podcast. Till then though, you can catch me over on Instagram, Threads and Twitter at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website mikkiwilliden.com to book a one-on-one call with me. All right team, you have a great week.